morning. Viewpoint, program of personalities, politicians, and perspectives, co-hosted by Judy K. Busby. We have a great guest this morning. The guy's great with the weather, but he hasn't, he talks about it, but he doesn't do anything about it. We're going to introduce him. I don't know why we like him a lot up here in Logan County, and Judy and I enjoy him coming back often. But Jesus, he just do the job once in a while instead of talk about it. We'd be a lot better off. Kudos.
Oh, dear.
Kudos. Number one, it was in the paper recently that we lost a young airman. Gentleman came from Hopedale, Major Nunnan, I believe. I forgot. I'm not correct about the exact spelling and pronunciation. Anyway, there's a gentleman up in northwestern Illinois who's known as a flag man. And he makes it a point at military funerals and so forth to appear and causes lots of flags to be displayed. And I read in the paper where he had gotten in touch with the folks at Hopedale, I guess it was, and asked for a few volunteers to get flags up for this gentleman. They turned out something like 100 volunteers to put the flags up for the gentleman. And the major was buried out at Camp Butler down in Springfield. And I was told, and later on several people wondered why these emergency vehicles and so forth were on the overpasses as you went from south to Springfield to Camp Butler. And that I guess all the overpasses, they'd arranged to have the emergency vehicles up there. Now that's something. That's really something. It's a sobering moment. And a lot of people, go along with their lives and just don't contribute very much, but other people step forward. So to all those folks who had anything to do with the major services, kudos to them. And obviously kudos to our railers, number two in the state. Big deal, and it really is for those young fellas and their coach. Very pleased for Al, and he's had a great career with these kids. And more importantly than their knowledge of basketball and their athletic skill, those kids, when they leave Coach Alexander's supervision, they're better young men. And that's more important than anything else. And finally, he raised some big money here on the Polar Plunge.
Yes.
That's 32 or 33 grand. Boy, hats off to the organizers and to the folks who dipped their little pinkies in there and got frozen.
Speaking of the weather, man.
Yeah, right, no kidding. I noted that our roving reporter from across Wisconsin, Lois Harvey, sent some things that Judith would like to share with you out there.
I can't help myself. I have to. Jim, you're going to laugh, okay?
In spite of yourself,
he's practicing laughing right now. Okay.
And when he laughs, then he's sweet.
This is the top 8 morons of 2013. Will the real dummy please stand up? AT&T fired President John Walter after 9 months, saying he lacked intellectual leadership. He received a $26 million severance package. Perhaps it's not Walter who's lacking intelligence.
Amen to that. Hello.
Oh, dear. One more, okay? Police in Oakland, California spent 2 hours attempting to subdue a gunman who had barricaded himself inside his home. After firing 10 tear gas canisters, officers discovered that the man was standing beside them in the police line shouting, "Please come out and give yourself up." I think those are hysterical.
Yeah, you save the rest of them. Time to time we'll bring those out.
Oh, dear heaven.
Serious note, at least for the old guy. I noted this morning in the paper where we have a couple of young folks here in town who are a part of Get Covered America. Once a community organizer, always a community organizer, I guess. Whence cometh the money to pay these folks who are going all around from Beaton to Bursonview and Williamsville and New York City and Hartford, Connecticut, wherever, to get people involved and enrolled in Obamacare? Where comes that money?
Out of your pockets, sir.
Between that and the entitlements, and then we worry about how we're going to cover folks who are going to retire, their Social Security. By the way, that went up. We'll talk about that later on. Introduce our guest before I get carried away.
He needs no introduction. Chris Miller from the local weather station. And Chris is a manager there, and Chris comes to be with us right along, and we are eternally grateful to you, Chris. And he mentioned to me as we were getting out of our respective cars out there that if he had a dime for everybody who'd said to him that they're sick of winter, he would be a wealthy man. And I bet that's the truth.
If I were a rich man.
Yeah, right.
Indeed.
Yeah. This has been impressive.
Yeah,
Character
impressive.
builder at best.
Yeah, impressive to say the least. Yeah, it's been a very long time since we've seen a winter like this one. Snowiest winter in Lincoln's history, coldest winter in Lincoln's history, and I'm sure a lot of people out there listening remember the winters of the late 70s, early 80s. Those were pretty brutal because, we had them several years in a row, 77, 78, then into 79, again in 81 and 82. So at that point, we weren't talking about global warming. We were talking about the next ice age was approaching because we had a handful of winters that were pretty bad. We had some pretty severe winters in the mid-1960s and in the mid-40s, too. And this winter eclipsed them all. The records, really detailed weather records for Lincoln, go back to 1905.
Is that right?
Yeah. So over the last almost 110 years now, this was the coldest winter that we've had on record. The average temperature, we take the high, we take the low. It's simple, add them together, divide by 2. That's your average temperature for the day. And then over the whole winter, then we average all those out to get the average temperature for the winter. And it only came out at about 20.5 degrees. In a typical winter, we might get below zero 3, 4, or 5 times, something like that, around there. This year, we were below zero about 15 times. We were below 10 below zero, almost 10 times. So it was darn cold. And, yeah, that Arctic air was coming down here all the time, and with it came the snow.
Yeah.
So we had another half inch of snow yesterday morning.
Yeah, wasn't that the berries?
You should have heard what I said about you yesterday morning.
Took his
Kind
name
words,
in vain,
I'm sure. Yeah. We in a typical winter here in Lincoln, we might get 20 inches of snow, all totaled. All added together, 20 inches. Last year at this time, that's about what we had.
Even after that big snow that came at the very end of the winter.
Yep, and included that one. Because prior to that, we had only had about 5 inches of snow. So really, the winter, when you look at December, January, February last year, hardly any snow at all. And then we had that big, 15-inch, or I don't remember the exact total, but it was over a foot, I remember that. And that brought us up closer to 20 inches. This year, we're already up to 47.5. So more than double. So it was just a factor of, in the middle of November, we could see the weather pattern was getting such that everything was coming at us from our friends in Canada. Everything from the Northwest. And it just didn't let up.
You might say former friends.
Former friends, yes. Yes. And there were parts of your old homeland up in Minnesota.
Yes.
40 below zero, 50 below zero. I'm not talking the wind chill. That was the temperature.
That's right.
So it was just a brutal winter across the entire Midwest. And
they're still up to here in snow.
They are. They are. In fact, I was talking to some people yesterday, and they were telling me they're pretty avid snowmobilers around here. And they said that up in northern Wisconsin, northern Minnesota, it was so cold, and there was so much snow that they weren't out able to groom the trails. They weren't out getting out there doing their snowmobiling, doing cross-country skiing. And the economy up there really relies on that. So
yes, it does. What's opened up a whole new thing for the northern part of the country, because there was nothing that people wanted to participate in a few years ago.
Yeah.
And with the advent of the snowmobile brought them some real money.
Yes, absolutely. And ice fishing. You know, the ice fishing in parts of central and northern Illinois actually was pretty good. We had enough ice, plenty of ice. Some years there was no ice.
Yeah.
There was no ice at all to do any ice fishing. But the ice fishing farther north was just, it was tough because they had to drill through so much ice.
Deep, yeah.
The Great Lakes iced over, and it's been a long time since that happened. So parts of Lake Superior, it was good because, again, it helped with some tourism. People were able to get out to some of the ice caves and walk out on far out onto the lake. But again, it was just so brutally cold. And
Now, that was the jet stream that got us. How come
Yes.
it changed its mind and got so friendly?
yeah, or maybe cantankerous. is
Maybe
another
that
word.
was it.
Yeah, it got angry with us. Yeah, it was something that we call the polar vortex, and we brought that term out, and people were saying, "Oh, is this something new?" No, it's been around. The polar vortex has been there forever. Essentially, what it is most of the year, right around the North Pole, there is this area of the air circulates around, an area of low pressure, and it's very cold there. You know, when you've got the thick ice and everything up there. And normally it behaves itself and stays in one area of northern Canada. Every once in a while, a cold front will come down, bring some of that cold air our way, and then we'll shift back, and our jet stream will come from the west, and we'll get that nice modified Pacific air and typical winter weather here in central Illinois. This year, the polar vortex, for whatever reason, and it does this on occasion, split into two pieces. One part went over Siberia, basically, where it's cold up there. That they just expect that kind of weather. But the other part broke off and settled down in the south central part of Canada, very close to the northern U.S., and it just forced that jet stream to come down into the Midwest, and at times it got all the way down to the Gulf Coast. There were times when our friends in New Orleans and Mobile, Alabama, and they were below freezing.
And that's
That's
terrible
cold
for them.
down there.
Oh, down
They aren't
there.
set up
But it's
for it.
wet down there. And,
Exactly. And remember what happened twice in Atlanta, Georgia. The snowfalls they had. Now up here we think, 2 inches of snow. You should be able to handle that with a little ice. They don't have as many snow plows, and they don't have a big, nice supply of salt sitting there waiting to treat the roads.
Even when we
So-
lived in Des Moines, come winter, you could either get your snow moved or your garbage moved, because they'd put plows on the front of the garbage trucks. And I remember a prayer at church one day by the minister's sweet little wife. She said, "And I would be thankful if they'd come and pick up my garbage." They weren't
sure.
set up for it even.
No. And so this was just a really unusual winter because of that jet stream. Fortunately, lately, and when I say lately, I mean just in the last couple of weeks, we've seen a trend, a shift, where it's starting to move itself, this polar vortex, back where it belongs, back up toward the North Pole. And we have been getting some milder weather, and there's so much snow, as you alluded to, up in Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, upper Michigan, the Dakotas, and all of southern Canada, especially Ontario, Manitoba, those provinces where we get our air from. They've got tons of snow in that area, and so anytime we get a northwest wind, it's bringing the cold air down, which is why this morning it's so chilly, and why we got that little bit of snow yesterday that caused some problems. So but we are gradually working away from this. We do see light at the end of the tunnel, so spring's approaching.
Pinky swear.
Pinky swear. Yeah. I'm just
By July it'll be warm.
Yeah. Yeah, that I can say with 100% certainty.
Regular certainty.
Yes.
Well, over and above the comfort factor, there's a huge economic impact over and above heating costs. I'm thinking quickly of of all the automobile accidents that were caused countrywide as a result of bad highway conditions. And that in and of itself would be just a fantastic high figure.
Absolutely. Lots of car accidents. Communities spending so much money on the snow removal with the salt and the money involved there. Now that the people with snowplow businesses, they're probably tired, but they're making some
They've
money.
had a decent year for a change.
Yeah. So when it comes out of one pot of money, it goes into another pot.
Sure.
But yeah, it was not good for local businesses, people not going out when it gets very cold. It just gets dangerously cold, where really at times you don't want anybody going out. So local businesses were suffering.
True.
So there was some give and some take there, but overall, yeah, it did have a negative economic impact.
It was more take than give.
Absolutely.
You know, there are a lot of folks who wake up each morning most folks, in a warm house. Some of the lesser fortunate ones did not, and that's certainly a serious matter. But back in the old days, as the old people say, we had coal-fired furnaces, and this is before stokers, and they banked them at night, and you get up in the morning and your house was cold. That's just the way it was. And that was just a normal course of events.
Yeah, absolutely. And from what I understand, in the fall, we could already see, or we were hearing in the news about propane shortages.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
And
yes.
then the price of propane just shot through the roof. So, you got to really feel for the folks that are, have to use the propane for heating or heating oil.
It's a huge economic problem.
And it's cost quite a bit of money to heat. And I know just getting the bill from Ameren with the natural gas on there just to keep it comfortable. We turn the thermostat down a little bit, but there's only so much that you want to go down to, especially when you're not feeling well during the cold and flu season. So yeah, it hit people's pocketbooks. That's for sure.
Yeah, I watched mine go up $3 a day. I always take my fuel bill and divide it by the days just to see what it costs to
$3 a day.
Well, it went up $3 a day.
Whoa, dogs.
It started 5 something in the fall, and then the first thing you know, the top one was $8.58 a day, and that's a huge problem for a lot of people.
Yeah. Other things that we're just starting to see that are starting to surface, and again, I've just heard this over the last few days, as we're starting to warm up here a little bit, is we're uncovering problems with sewers. Anybody who's on sewer lines, especially some of the older lines. The sewer folks are going to be having some issues, water lines, having issues because we were frozen down so many feet down below the ground, and now as that's thawing, some of these issues are starting to come to light. So,
well, Judith, there's an old saying about past is prologue. We're going to talk about the prologue here after we have a commercial break, and we're going to nail him down and see if summer's going to be as tough as the winter. Back live in the studios here at WLCN 96.3. Somebody might have a question for our Chris Miller, weather expert, and I mean that very seriously and with respect. 648-5510. I'm going to exempt Chris from this category, but it's been said that some of the leading writers of fiction employed by the government are in the weather people. I would say, by any measure of standards, that's certainly not right, because with the dipsticks we've got out there writing things out there now, they would far surpass fiction writers of any kind. John Steinbeck couldn't even hold a candle to some of the fiction writers we've got out there in Washington right now, Pennsylvania. Go right ahead. I think you should introduce our guest again.
Yeah, Chris. Jim mentioned off the air. Thank you, Jim.
Oh, he's a real study.
La Niña and El Niño, and how there's been a little switch there, so that things are looking up maybe for summerish.
Sure. Well, and in fact, not even so much. In the summer, we're expecting an El Nino to develop, and essentially what that means is warmer water near the equator in the Pacific Ocean, right off the coast of South America. We're seeing signs that that water is going to start warming here very soon. And what that means for us, especially when we get to the fall and winter next year, is El Nino is a milder winter, which everybody would say, yay, give us that. Because after this winter, I think having a milder winter would make a lot of people happy. Not everybody, but it'd make a lot of people, because you're not going to make everybody happy.
Never.
But never. But that at least is a good thing to see. Those things really don't have too much of an impact on our summer weather. In fact, I was just looking the other day at summer outlooks, and what we got from the longer range outlooks were just indicating, we don't see a trend really in the summer. But I thought, I want to take a look back and see, specifically here to central Illinois, to the Lincoln area, when we had really cold and snowy winters in the past. Maybe that can tell us, what we're expecting. What was the summer like after, say, the winter of 1979 or the winter of 82 and that type of thing? And I went back to 1910 weather records, and I looked at that. And essentially what it came out with was, again, there's not a whole lot of trend, but it was leaning more toward normal type summer conditions. Nothing really on the overly hot side, nothing on the overly cool side, but more trending toward a typical central Illinois summer. Warm, at times hot, humid, periods of showers and thunderstorms, that type of thing. I looked at severe storms too, because the biggest question I'm getting is, this winter was just so terrible. I'm sure the spring thunderstorms with the tornadoes and everything is just going to be brutal. And when we looked at that, there were some springs that just had so many tornadoes, it was terrible. And then yet other springs, after a terrible winter, had hardly any tornadoes. So that tells me there's really no correlation between spring and summer thunderstorms and what the winter was like. So it's just, we have seen some signs, though, that it could be pretty active this spring in central Illinois.
As far as thunderstorms or even into tornadoes?
Thunderstorms and tornadoes.
Oh, thank you for that.
Yeah, we already saw that in February.
Chris, is there a direct correlation ocean currents and our weather?
Absolutely, yeah, and that's something that for many years, even people in meteorology couldn't quite make the connection. It said, okay, Pacific Ocean, we know with fronts coming off the Pacific, they cross the U.S. and eventually they get to us. What does the weather at the equator have to do with our weather here in Illinois?
We're a little bit north of there.
You're a little north. We're a little ways away from there. But as we've done more studies, we found definitely a direct correlation, because what it does is, again, our friend the jet stream, it changes that to the point where when you get the warm air building in the Pacific, it pushes the jet stream, it keeps it farther north. So our friend the polar vortex from this past summer, when the water is warmer at the equator, stays up near the pole. It doesn't have that opportunity to come down into the central United States. So we have milder temperatures. We don't get as many of these Arctic outbreaks. We still get a day or two where it gets below zero, that type of thing, but not the prolonged, we have days and days where it's below zero. In fact, somebody told me yesterday there were parts of the upper Midwest that were below zero, in fact, 20 below zero this past winter for a week or more at a time. So that type of weather pattern with the warm air at the equator, which we call El Nino, that doesn't really give us the really cold winter conditions. So there is a direct correlation, especially in the cold season, not so much in the summer.
I was amazed at this coverage of that Malaysian disaster to read of this, see on the TV, the speed of the ocean currents down there in that Indian Ocean. It was remarkable. And one commentator said, I don't know whether they're right or wrong, but that some ships get in these currents because they can save fuel by letting the currents move the ship.
Yep.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Absolutely, especially where they're looking in the southern Indian Ocean and the southern Pacific Ocean. When you get southeast of Australia there, you get some very fast currents, but it can be pretty dangerous too. So they have to be very careful. And it's the same thing with our air currents, with the jet stream. The jet stream is a current of air, very high-speed air. And we call it the jet stream because the jets love to get up into that, and they save fuel. If you're on a flight from, say, Chicago to New York, or L.A. to New York, typically our jet stream is very fast in the spring from west to east or southwest to northeast, and they can save a lot of fuel.
They'll drop the prices then of the tickets.
Maybe
Not so much.
not so much. Yeah, if it's one way. Now coming back the other way, they have to fight that, and so they don't fly in the jet stream. They'll fly either above it or below it and try to get out of it. But yeah, that's just another current of air. So yeah, all that water currents, air currents, they act very similar.
So long term this summer.
Yeah.
Well, short term now, it's going to be right around the corner. What do you think we're looking at overall?
Well, overall,
Golfers want to know out there.
oh yeah, absolutely.
And farmers.
We're not completely out of the woods as far as the cool and even I hate to say this, it's a 4-letter word, snow. In April, we get snow in April every once in a while, and I'm not going to say we're out of the woods till the middle of April. Once we get past tax day, that lovely day that everybody enjoys so much, once we get past that day, then I think we can say we're out of the woods. But so we still have a couple of weeks to go yet. But beyond that, we're seeing some good signs. Some signs that we're going to get more into the type of weather that we are used to here as we get into May and June. And I was mentioning during the break too that one concern was that the subsoil moisture was very low. In fact, we were still in a severe drought as we were heading through November into early December. Some of the moisture was replenished, but the fact that, and especially in the top few inches, because when the ground froze so quickly, and it's still frozen as you go down several inches, that moisture that we got from the snow, and a few times we had some rain, it couldn't penetrate. So we're still...
Well, that's just a pity.
It really is,
all
because
that for nothing.
We got all that moisture, and yet you're right, Judy. It was almost like it was for nothing. It did help replenish some of the lower lakes. Bloomington and Decatur were having such severe problems with the levels of their lakes. It helped that. Some of the creeks and streams, very low stream levels, and it did help to the point where some of them actually flooded, so that wasn't so good. But the subsoil moisture, we still have some issues with that, and we need to get some rains here, especially in the first part of April, to help replenish that. Not so much that we get mud that it's hard to get into the fields. But
what's our outlook now for this rain this spring then?
Well, what we can see, the outlook for the spring is that the first part of the spring looks like it could be kind of wet, which, number one, is good to get us out of the dry conditions. We do see that. The drought should be a thing of the past here as we get into the spring. The bad news is that as we get those rains, those first few layers where the water is really going to be, it's going to be tough to get some field work done. So,
but it's not going to soak in. It's going to sit there. Well,
as we continue to thaw out below the ground, those first few inches, some of that is going to start penetrating. It's going to start soaking down in, especially in that first half of April. We should start to see some of that. But beyond that, again, May, June, we're not seeing any trends, and that's just typical of this time of the year because we get the thunderstorms where one person gets a dousing of rain, and the other person is saying, "Where's my rain? I have nothing coming out of the clouds," and it's just that hit and miss thunderstorm type thing, not the widespread rains like we get in the late winter and early spring.
It seemed that last summer, when the rain would come, it stopped right at that line on 55 where it says Logan County. Really?
It did.
Bloomington got it, and nothing happened here. What's with that line on the highway, and who built that highway? Let's talk to them.
Well, and I don't want to blame the highway too much, but what happens is when showers and storms come toward our area, they need to keep going. They need moisture from the air. They need moisture from the soil, from the vegetation to keep going. What had happened was there were enough times that those storms stayed north or south of our area, and we started to gradually become drier and drier. I would have never thought in April or May. If you remember back to April and May of last year, it was so wet. We couldn't shut off the faucet.
Yeah.
There was so much rain everywhere. And then finally it started to shut off a little bit. And we said, thank goodness. There were some late plantings that people got in. I know even just my own garden was planted late. There was so much mud. And we started to dry out. And then it was like, okay, now we need some rain. And we couldn't get any because some areas dried out so much that when the storms approached, there was no moisture for them to feed off of, and they just disappeared. They just dried up. And droughts, when these especially the little small droughts like we had developed in August last year in this area, they feed on themselves, basically. And what that means is that once the ground is dry, you get a shower or storm coming toward you, it's just going to dry up. And that's what happened last year in August and into September.
Well, I think maybe you people in the meteorology business better look into that and see if you can do something about that. We don't want another summer like that.
Jim, I'm sitting here listening and enjoying Chris as we do when we have him up here, and we always appreciate his appearance. But I'm sitting here thinking, this young fella decides to retire. He would have no problem at all getting a job teaching somewhere.
Well, he could teach history, he could teach geography, he could teach meteorology.
Yeah,
really, you got them all pretty straight, bud.
Thank you.
Chris, over and above the weather that today we're going to talk about, the facility, the physical plant we have out here on Route 10, how long has that been there? And let's speak to economics a little bit, because that has an economic impact in our community with boys and ladies who maybe commute and buy gas, the salaries that are paid out there. So it's not a big organization. It certainly is a specialized organization. So take it from there, Chris.
Sure. The facility was built 20 years ago in 1994. Is when we started construction out there, and we started moving in late in 94 during the winter and into the spring of 95. So it's almost 20 years now that we've been out there. We have a staff of 23 people. We've got, of the 23 people, 16 meteorologists on staff, which means we at least have a bachelor's degree, and several have master's degree in meteorology. We have an excellent support staff of electronics technicians. All of those guys that we have out there in our electronics section receive their training through the military, either through the Navy, Air Force, Army, and we also have administrative support help as well. And our newest secretary is a veteran as well. So we've got quite a few veterans on our staff. And you're right, we've got several of our staff live here in Lincoln, but we have some that live down towards Springfield and Bloomington and Peoria and Decatur, and so there is an economic footprint from our facility there. We also have tours of our facility. I get calls from. In fact, I just took a call yesterday from a YMCA group that wanted to bring some kids out to our facility, and I said, we can only handle so many at one time.
Yes.
So while we're touring one group, the other group is going to be in town having lunch somewhere. So there's a lot of that as well. We get people from all over Central Illinois come and want to take a look at our facility, and then they go into town and they'll spend money at the local restaurants and get some gasoline and things like that. So there is an economic footprint from that, and every time there's a warning, a watch, just a basic weather forecast that goes out. It says National Weather Service, Lincoln, Illinois.
Yeah.
And so I'd like to think that by every time that goes out that says Lincoln, that's just another person hearing about the town and hearing
Quit
about
it after 10 p.m., will you? I don't want my machine going after 10 o'clock.
Oh, yeah.
Well, aren't you like hospital and prison? Don't you do 24/7?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we have at least 2 people, sometimes 3 people on staff 24/7. When the weather gets severe, when we have the tornadoes and we're expecting severe storms, before all of that develops, we start beefing up our staff. You remember last November when Washington, Illinois had that terrible tornado go through their area, and Gifford, Illinois, and there were 25 tornadoes in the state that day. There were 8 fatalities, unfortunately, and 183 people were injured in that mid-November outbreak. Our staffing levels, and I was working that day, we had 3 people to start the day out, and we immediately escalated to almost 13 people. We had our information technology, our computer specialist there. One of our electronic specialists was there, because that's the last time we need something to break down.
Yeah.
And if it does, we got to have somebody fix it right away. And we had a number of our meteorologists there watching, because we had storms all over the place. I mean, they developed from the northern reaches of the area that we watch, which goes up a good 30-40 miles north of Peoria, just south of I-80, all the way down to south of I-70, Effingham, Flora, Lawrenceville, Olney, those areas. We were getting severe storms and tornadoes down in those areas as well. So we had a lot to cover, and so we had a full complement. I don't think we ever had that many staff members in at one time, but it was a very unique event.
It was a wild time.
Yeah,
it was
you mentioned
terrible.
Washington. It's strange that FEMA couldn't come up with any assistance for those folks up there. I don't know how these bureaucrats think. Well, there's the operative word, think. But you wonder why they didn't, why they couldn't come up with some money to help those folks up there.
Yeah, from what I understand, the individual assistance for homeowners, they did come up with some help for them, but beyond that, the city of Washington, the Tazewell County, was pretty much left holding the bag, because and you talk about all the mountain of debris. I was up there to see the damages. In fact, my brother-in-law lost his house up there. We used to live in Washington, so we knew a lot of people that had damage.
Oh yeah.
And all of the torn up houses, and you're talking over 1,000 houses just in Washington. And you think of all the materials, building materials, things that had to be hauled off. That costs a lot of money to do that in time and where you're going to take it, and they couldn't get any relief for that. Is a shame.
Does the fact that in this area, if you stood on a tin can, you could see for 500 miles because there's no hill to obstruct your vision. Does this flatness make us more apt to have tornadoes?
For the smaller tornadoes that we get fairly frequently, what it does is it keeps them on the ground a little bit longer, because the smaller ones, the ones that maybe have winds of up to 100 miles per hour and cause minor damage primarily, it does take some kind of topography, or even a large grain elevator will cause those things to break up a little bit. Now, the bigger tornadoes, the ones that cause damage, like tearing the roof off your house and what happened up in Washington, the violent ones, nothing's going to stop those. And the flatness of the land or the terrain really doesn't play much of a role for those tornadoes.
How long is the time frame of the average tornado being on the ground? I realize that they hop, but how far do they go?
The average tornado will track somewhere between 2 miles and just under 5 miles. and be on the ground for 5 minutes or so. Not very long. That's the average tornado. Now we have the bigger tornadoes, and again, I keep referring to Washington because that was a big one. That was on the ground for almost 50 miles.
Was it?
It was moving at 60 miles per hour. So it tracked 50 miles in just under an hour, in 50 minutes.
Okay.
And it was moving extremely fast. Those are pretty rare. Those types of tornadoes, that's about 2% of all the tornadoes we get. So they don't happen very often, thankfully.
Yes.
But yeah, the average tornado is on the ground for roughly about 5 minutes or so. But we see several of them. Like you said, one could form and dissipate, and then the next one forms. And so that's what we always have to remain vigilant and look out and watch out for these
Chris,
things.
are there still spotters out there? Do you have folks that call in that are designated watchers or spotters?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, last night we just did spotter training in Lincoln. I taught the class at the Lincoln Christian Church last night for about 100 people that came out.
Really?
Oh, good.
Had a nice turnout there. And
Do you think the awfulness of the Washington tornado made more people aware that this could be us too?
Absolutely. We, in fact, everywhere we go in central Illinois, we're seeing higher numbers of people coming out, and people that have never been there. We always ask, who's new? Who's never been to a spotter class? Usually it's 20 to 30%. This year it's running almost 50%. So we're seeing a lot of people come out and want to help, and spotters are critical. When we get information from spotters, that goes in the warnings, the statements. When people see that in the warnings, and we've had people in Washington and all over central Illinois tell us, when I see that in a warning, a spotter reported a tornado, I go to the basement right away. And so it makes a huge difference.
We just recently passed Tornado Preparedness Week.
Right.
Now, we know about to go to the basement, but if you're out on the highways and byways, they used to say to go to a ditch. Now I think they say don't do that.
Well, actually, the very best thing to do is get off, stop. And if it's far enough away from you, just stop, stay in your car as it passes in front of you, hopefully 2-3 miles or more away. If it's right on top of you, you see it's bearing down. If you can get to a building as quickly as possible, do so. But let's say you're out in the middle of an area where there are no buildings to take shelter. The best thing still is to get in the ditch. And the reason is because tornadoes will roll vehicles over, pick them up, throw them. If you're in there, it'd be like being in a terrible car accident. So it is best to get down low so the stuff flying through the air doesn't hit you.
Oh, that's the reason, not so that the tornado won't move you.
Right. You want to have a very low profile because there's a lot of debris flying through the air with tornadoes.
Sure.
And you don't want to get hit by any of that because you could be severely injured or killed.
Yeah.
Our guest this morning has been Chris Miller from our local weather station. We always appreciate your visit, being with us, Chris. We can cover weather many, many ways, but it's always new and it's always different because that's the way it is every day. Chris, we will be calling on you again here this summer when it's dry and hot and everybody's mad at you.
Well, the weather changes here so much. The meteorologists here, somebody's always mad at us for something. But I appreciate you having me here. I really enjoy it.
You know what they say about weathermen, they're smart enough to predict the weather, but they're also smart enough not to bet on that prediction. So with that, we'll thank Chris Miller and we'll close Viewpoint for today. Thank you, Chris.
You're welcome.